These pyrotechnic rockets, photographed during the victory celebrations in London in 1946, represented to the vast majority of people in this country the meaning of the word rocket prior to the outbreak of war in 1939. But the results of German rocket development work, which became all too apparent towards the end of the war, showed that in some aspects of rocket technology they had forged right ahead of every other country. Yet in 1980, the Germans were no further forward in this subject than anyone else. How then did this apparently sudden advance come about during the period between the wars? How far had they gone by 1945? This film is intended to give some answers to these questions. To illustrate how an idea can develop from very humble beginnings, a short review of the progress of the aeroplane is shown. Few people at the turn of the century, seeing Otto Lilienthal, shown here, and other early pioneers in the study of aeronautics, would have believed that in less than 50 years the aeroplane would develop to its present state of efficiency. Here are the Wright brothers, famous for being the first men to fly a heavier-than-air machine at Kitty Hawk Sands in 1903. And here, Blériot, who won the distinction of being the first man to fly the English Channel, and who firmly believed, even in these early days, that the monoplane would permanently replace the biplane. These early pioneers, for the most part enthusiasts with little technical backing, were treated with much disbelief and ridicule. Yet, by their persistence, these men proved their ideas to be practical, and established the importance of the heavier-than-air machine. With the outbreak of the First World War, the need for efficient aeroplanes was soon realized, and during the war years much progress was made in the improvement of aircraft. Here are a few examples of aircraft of this period. An early British heavy bomber, the famous Gotha bomber, with an albatross under the wing. During the years of peace that followed, aircraft designers, aided by the experience gained during the war, set to work to produce more efficient machines, and we see the aeroplane develop from a mass of struts and bracing to clean aerodynamical lines. An early forebearer of the Junkers 52. The Dornier Wahl shows a considerable improvement over its ancestors, as does the world-famous Dornier DOX, an attempt to build a flying wing, but without success, and the designer added a normal fuselage and tail to make it into a more orthodox aircraft. The Heinkel He-111, originally designed as a civil machine, but readily convertible into a bomber. The Douglas DC-2, elder brother of the famous Dakota, and the Focke Wulf Condor, another of Germany's civil machines readily converted into a bomber. When the Second World War started in 1939, the aeroplane had already reached a high peak of efficiency. Some German military aircraft at this period are shown here. The Heinkel He-113, an unsuccessful competitor to the Messerschmitt Me-109, Germany's standard single-seater fighter. The Focke Wulf Fw-190, an improved single-seater fighter. And the Junkers 188, a late operational aircraft used by the Germans before the advent of jet propulsion. And so, having watched the aeroplane develop from a primitive machine into an established mode of transport and a weapon of war, we now go to the rocket, our main theme, to the early primitive rocket of the 1920s. is a typical example of early experiment. The rockets attached to the skater's back were calculated to propel him along at a considerable speed, but the experiment proved little. Except perhaps that rockets get hot when they burn. Experiments were also carried out using rockets on a motorbike, and it is believed that these were reasonably successful. Here is a picture of one of these bikes in action. In America, a courageous youth conceived the bright idea of attaching solid fuel rockets to a motorboat. Off we go, but apart from putting up a first-class smoke screen, our young friend's efforts were not successful. An experiment carried out in Czechoslovakia to illustrate the principle of reaction propulsion is interesting because of its relationship to rocket power, which is also reaction propulsion. This boat, in which water is being forced out of nozzles at the sides, demonstrates the speed and degree of maneuverability that may be attained if the propulsion unit can be properly controlled. The effect here is similar to that experienced by a fireman holding a fire hose. The reaction to the jet of water coming out of the nozzle exerts a considerable force on him, and a large hose often takes 2 men to hold. Among the uses to which the solid fuel rocket has been successfully applied is that of life-saving at sea. This rocket, which functions in the same manner as the ordinary firework rocket, is used to carry a lifeline to the shore aboard and rescue subsequently affected. In 1928, a series of experiments were begun by Failure, Opel and Sander to discover the characteristics of solid fuel rockets and to examine the possibilities of this form of propulsion. A number of cars were built using solid fuel as the propulsion agent. Here is one that achieved a speed of 112 miles an hour. These pictures show the car in action, and it is noted that the wings were fitted to keep the car on the ground. Slow motion pictures show the difference between the jet exhaust velocity and the speed of the car, an indication of poor efficiency. In all these experiments, black powder is the rocket propellant used, hence the large clouds of smoke. To carry further the experiments, and in order to get higher speeds, a number of rail cars were built. Most of these suffered mishaps of some sort, but it is a tribute to the tenacity with which the experimenters tackled the problem that they carried on in spite of the repeated failures. Here is a trial to test the effect of acceleration on animal life. In this case, the results were rather unfortunate for the cat, as the car blew up. More rail cars were built by Opel and Sander, still working on the same lines. In one case, the car blew up at the start, and in another, the car left the rails owing to a rocket becoming loose in the rocket housing, the effect of which can be seen here. Volkart also built a car, this being constructed on slightly different lines. The rockets were mounted in rows, fired one after another. He too achieved some success. although the venture appears somewhat dangerous in places. All these pictures of rocket, road and rail cars are included to give you some idea of the amount of work carried out in Germany on this subject. In April 1929, he made further demonstration runs with his car at Nuremberg. Operated from Opel and Sander, he constructed, in cooperation with Eisfeld, several more rail cars of a simpler nature. These achieved speeds of up to 112 miles an hour, but mostly suffered violent ends for various reasons. It will be seen that the story of the aircraft is being repeated. Small, enthusiastic groups with little technical backing, again being treated with the same mixture of curiosity and skepticism. This car reached a speed of 112 miles an hour and was then given a second acceleration, estimated to increase the speed to 190 miles an hour. But unfortunately, the car left the rails. Much to the consternation of the chap in the field at the back. In February 1929, Failure built a rocket sledge and tried it out on the Eibsee. The lesson learned from these experiments was that the short duration and uncontrollability of burning made solid fuel rockets unsuitable for many purposes, although the power required was there. In April 1931, a seeker after notoriety who had obviously carried out little basic work on rocket propulsion sought to emulate Failure, but with very indifferent results. An obvious use to which the rocket could be applied was the transporting of mails at high speed. Reinhold Tilling designed this rather unusual rocket for this purpose. When the propellant is exhausted, two of the vanes spring out and become wings, enabling the rocket to spiral to Earth. Here again black powder is used as the propellant. The first German postal rocket was fired by Tilling, and the mails, in this case 180 postcards, are inserted in the nose of the rocket. Launching is effected from a pole, the motor being fired electrically. Tilling's rocket caused considerable interest, and a public demonstration was given in 1931 at Meppel. The rocket seen here is a larger version of the postal rocket and is made of metal, whereas the former was wooden, the principles of operation being the same. The rocket is set on the launching rail and fired from an almost vertical position. Ends, the rocket appears slightly unstable, and when it reaches its zenith, the vanes spring out and the spiral to Earth begins. In 1934, a German, Gerhard Zucker, came to England and, backed by a London stamp dealer, carried out some trials with postal rockets. The last of these trials, which were permitted but not backed by the General Post Office, was this attempt to fire from Lymington to the Isle of Wight. This was a failure, and further trials were stopped by the Home Office, owing to the danger to the public. In Germany, Zucker again attempted to solve the problem of a transport rocket with this large capacity cylinder to which rockets were attached. A match is applied, and the transport rocket takes to the air, though not for very long. Reinhold Tilling, the designer of the gliding rocket seen earlier, also designed rockets for military purposes. These rockets, as can be seen, closely resemble our own aircraft rockets, and are in fact operated on much the same principle, except that black powder is used as the propellant. Tilling, who was later killed whilst pressing powder, achieved excellent results with his rockets, despite the fact that he used very crude equipment. For instance, he used a pair of kitchen scales, suitably coupled, to measure thrust. In 1933 and 34, Richard Tilling, who carried on his brother's work after his death, demonstrated a rocket fired from an aircraft. The firing trials were carried out at a height of 1,800 feet, and ranges of 7,500 to 8,500 yards obtained. These pictures show the stability and flatness of trajectory obtained with Tilling's rocket. In 1928, after a considerable amount of research by Beck, Torthausen and Lippisch, the Ron Rossiter Company built a full-sized aircraft powered by solid-fuel black powder rockets developed by Sander. This aircraft had a lot of teething troubles, the first few attempted takeoffs being unsuccessful. But eventually, as will be seen in a moment, the aircraft became airborne and made a short flight across the aerodrome. This is a picture deserving special attention, as it is the first rocket-propelled aircraft ever flown, and it should be noted that this event took place as far back as 1928. Slow motion picture of the flight. Goddard, working in America, in 1926 fired this first liquid fuel rocket into the air, using liquid oxygen and petrol as fuel. Winkler, in Germany, formed one of several groups who took up the research into liquid fuels for rocket propulsion. Winkler's workshop and test benches may be seen here. He decided on liquid oxygen and liquid methane as fuels, and built a series of rockets using these two agents. The HW-1, Winkler's first rocket, was a very small affair, and here may be seen the preparations for launching. The rocket is the small white object in the centre of the picture. After the failure of the HW-1, Winkler built another on the same lines, the HW-1A. This also was a failure. His next was the HW-2, which was intended to reach the stratosphere and bring back meteorological information. On the day of the launching, in October 1932, Winkler and co. drink to the success of the rocket. A cutaway picture of the HW-2 is shown here, illustrating the layout of the fuel tanks and combustion chamber. A large number of curious onlookers assembled at the starting point to witness the launch. Here is one of the fuels preparatory to being put in the rocket. The Met section was out in force. Here the fuse is attached, and the German Navy takes a quick look round to ensure that all is above board. The cameramen taking these pictures have obviously had some experience of this sort of thing before, as they came well prepared. The cause of the mishap was a leak of fuel into the case, which caused an explosion when the rocket was ignited, causing the mechanism to be separated from the outer case. Undeterred, Winkler set about finding the cause of the failure. An attempt to build a rocket-propelled pilotless aeroplane to carry mails across Greenwood Lake on the borders of New York and New Jersey. Liquid oxygen and petrol were used as the fuel. The liquid fuel motor is ignited by the gent in the asbestos suit, and the aircraft takes off, but doesn't go very far. The failure was caused by the deliberate twisting of the oxygen fuel pipes by a disgruntled mechanic who had been dismissed by the company. Another trial but this time the plane had little more ambition than the first, and attempts to take itself off, with rather disastrous results. In Germany, the group of workers under Obert and his pupils Nabel and von Braun were convinced of the possibilities of long-distance transport rockets. Their early work was really the beginning of the famous V2 rocket development. And here is a picture of Nabel and von Braun with some very early rockets. To return to failure, working with the firm Hayland, he built a rocket car using liquid fuels. This was tested at the Hayland works and ran for several minutes. A demonstration was given in April 1930. In May 1930, failure was killed in an explosion whilst carrying out tests, but Hayland decided to continue the experiments and, in collaboration with Peach, built a larger car on the same lines, seen here in the final stages of construction. The fuels used in these cars were liquid oxygen and petrol. Some of the advantages of liquid rocket fuels, or even burning, extension of burning time for as long as the fuels are fed into the combustion chamber, ease of regulation of fuel supply and alteration of thrust, greater freedom in design and construction, such as the placing of fuel tanks in any desired position, will be appreciated with this car. The finished car is being filled with liquid oxygen for another test, again in the Hayland works. Notice the obvious degree of control the driver has over the rate of combustion, and consequently the speed, and also the small jet issuing from the rear. After this, the Nazis came into power, and were not slow to realize the immense potential of the rocket as the power unit of the future. Consequently, work in Germany was soon ordered to be carried on only under military supervision and conditions of great secrecy. Consider for a moment what progress has been made up to this point. Much experience in the use of solid fuel rockets, including the design of some for military purposes, has been obtained. An example of rocket armament on aircraft has been seen. a rocket-propelled aircraft has made its first flight. Liquid fuel rockets based on liquid oxygen have been developed to a considerable extent and have already proved superior to the solid fuel rockets for the propulsion of the car you saw in the last scenes. Moreover, much experience in handling liquid oxygen and designing components used with it has been accumulated. A start has been made on small-scale rockets for high altitude and long-range employment. These were eventually to be developed into the V-2 under the direction of von Braun. In the period after 1934, not only were considerable strides made in solid fuel rockets, not only were liquid oxygen rockets brought to an advanced state of development, but in addition, self-igniting liquid rockets based on hydrogen peroxide and on nitric acid had been worked out. Full of work in this period is the liquid oxygen alcohol assisted takeoff unit for aircraft shown here. This was a natural follow-on from the liquid oxygen petrol rocket car you have just seen. The unit was developed by the rocket group at Peenemuende, who were also working on long-range rockets employing these fuels. Here are some static tests of this unit on a Heinkel He-111 aircraft. This unit produces a large flame when operating, a decided disadvantage for an aircraft takeoff rocket. Here the Heinkel He-111 is taking off with two liquid oxygen alcohol units in operation. The large flame is particularly apparent and, as will be seen later, caused damage to the aircraft. During tests, some of the ATO units were jettisoned. Here are some views of one of them which has been badly damaged on impact. The heat from the large flame is seen here to have damaged the underside of the wings and also the elevators. Liquid oxygen alcohol-assisted takeoff units were later given up after a time in favour of the hydrogen peroxide units developed by Walther. This is an early hydrogen peroxide-assisted takeoff unit developed by Walther. And here are four of these units shown installed on a Heinkel He-116 long-distance transport aircraft. These pictures were taken in 1937. During development work, the rockets were jettisoned after use in this manner, but it was found that they could not stand up to this treatment, and in the operational version used during the war, a parachute was added. Here are static tests of the 4 units installed in the Heinkel 116 aircraft in the tail-down position. The force of the jet stream was unexpectedly great, and it can be seen that large blocks in the roadway were dug up and flung about. There was no great damage to the aircraft except from such flying debris. The static test was carried out with the aircraft in a flying position, and this time on a grass airfield. Finally, a takeoff of the Heinkel 116 with 4 assisted takeoff units installed. 2 are used before the aircraft becomes airborne, and the other 2 are switched on when it leaves the ground. The smoke trail from this cold type of Walther unit is very considerable. The firm of Heinkel was the most progressive of any German aircraft firm in relation to rocket power units. An attempt on the world's record for covering 10,000 kilometers, held at that time by the Japanese, was made with a Heinkel 116 using 4 assisted takeoff units to get it into the air. This record attempt ended disastrously, as one of the ATO units broke loose from its mountings, causing the aircraft to swing on takeoff and finally to crash. Another ATO unit can be seen to fly across the picture in the manner of a projectile. Later, another attempt was made with a similar Heinkel 116, which, in July 1939, broke this 10,000 kilometer record. The next step was to see how far a rocket motor could be developed as the sole means of propulsion of an aircraft, rather than merely assisting its takeoff. Again, the Heinkel firm were to the fore. Here is an early Walther rocket motor installed in the Heinkel 112. In the first test, the Heinkel 112 tries out the rocket in normal flight. Progressive experiments were then made to see how far the piston engine of this aircraft could be dispensed with. Here first is a takeoff under full power, using the rocket motor additionally. Then followed another takeoff using less power on the piston engine. Further trials were made using still less power. All these trials took place between July and October 1938 under conditions of considerable secrecy. Finally, the hoped-for result was achieved. Here is the Heinkel He-112 taking off with the engine and propeller stationary, using only the rocket motor mounted in the tail. The aircraft takes off, turns and lands successfully on the rocket motor alone. A very marked stage in the development of the rocket motor for aircraft propulsion has been reached here by 1938. Progress in rocket motors was due to their development of the bi-fuel liquid motor, in which two fuels are brought separately into the combustion chamber and ignite spontaneously on mixing. One of the most satisfactory combinations is of C-Stoff and T-Stoff. Here is some C-Stoff, a hydrazine hydrate rocket fuel developed in Germany, and here some T-Stoff, concentrated hydrogen peroxide, is being dropped into it. This spontaneous combustion illustrates the principle of these bi-fuel liquid rocket motors. Concentrated hydrogen peroxide and similar oxidants making up these bi-fuel mixtures are somewhat dangerous to handle. Here some concentrated hydrogen peroxide is poured over textile material, which begins to burn almost immediately. In addition to the bi-fuel combination based on hydrogen peroxide, another most important combination is based on concentrated nitric acid. This picture shows two of these fuels igniting spontaneously when they come into contact with one another. One of them is concentrated nitric acid, and the other a specially developed mixture of chemicals known as amines. This is one of the Walther hydrogen peroxide assisted takeoff units used operationally during the war, the development of the earlier work just seen. Among other improvements, a parachute has now been added to recover the unit when jettisoned from the aircraft after use. When the fairings are removed, the unit is seen. Here is a section view of the assisted takeoff unit. The large spherical tank holds hydrogen peroxide. The smaller tank holds calcium permanganate, and these two are forced separately into the combustion chamber by means of compressed gas, led first through a pressure-reducing valve. They react spontaneously when they meet in the combustion chamber. All the operations necessary for using such an ATO unit are now reviewed. After collection, the unit is first filled with compressed air at 160 atmospheres pressure. The two rocket fuels used in this particular assisted takeoff unit are concentrated hydrogen peroxide and calcium permanganate solution. Here the latter, also known as C-Stoff, is being filled from a drum into 10 cans by means of a device which delivers the exact amount required for each assisted takeoff unit, 4.3 litres, into each can. This substance is not particularly dangerous, but the men are shown wearing protective clothing. Since 2 assisted takeoff units are being prepared for an aircraft, 2 of these filled cans are taken away. Here the permanganate solution is being filled into the ATO unit. Now the unit is brought up to be filled with concentrated hydrogen peroxide, which is run in from a special tank wagon after a measured amount, 96 litres, has first been pumped up into a reservoir. The men are again wearing protective clothing. This fuel is dangerous to handle, but if proper precautions and special equipment of this sort are used, the operation can be performed satisfactorily. The final operation is attachment of the parachute to the assisted takeoff unit. This is shown here, and the unit is now ready to be put on an aircraft. Here the unit is being wheeled up to a Heinkel He-111, and 1 takeoff unit attached under each wing. The unit is lifted easily by 4 men from its special trolley. After attachment under the wing, the static cord to open the parachute, when it is subsequently jettisoned, is fixed. And finally, the unit is, so to speak, armed by opening the safety valve which previously shut off the high-pressure air. Now the aircraft takes off. The pilot switches on the takeoff units, causing a diaphragm in the air pipeline in the takeoff unit to break and allow compressed air to blow the fuel separately into the combustion chamber. When the aircraft is taken off, the rocket units are jettisoned and come down in a parachute for collection, to be used again. After collection, they are washed out by filling the tanks with water and blowing through with compressed air. In addition to using the assisted takeoff unit on land planes, it proved very useful in getting flying boats off the water. Here, a rather larger takeoff unit is being ferried out to a Blohm Voss 138 flying boat. This unit is a development of the one just seen and gives a thrust of 1,500 kilograms for 30 seconds, the filled weight of the unit being 483 kilograms. Here these units are shown attached, one under each wing, no parachutes being included in this case. Here is the Blohm Voss 138 flying boat taking off with the assistance of these rocket units. To give an impression of the value of assisted takeoff units, a takeoff with and without these rockets will now be shown. These tests were carried out on the same day and under the same sea and wind conditions in December 1940. This is the takeoff without rocket assistance. The all-up weight is 16.5 tons and the time taken to become airborne is 43 seconds. For comparison, here is the exactly similar takeoff with the same all-up weight using one of these large rocket units under each wing. It will be obvious that the takeoff is greatly facilitated. In fact, the time taken is only 16 seconds. Thus, German flying boats from 1940 were capable of taking off with large overloads of petrol and accordingly increased their range. Yet another interesting application of such rocket-assisted takeoff units is shown here. The large German transport glider, the Messerschmitt Me-321, is seen having two rocket units attached under each wing. glider carries a tremendous load. For instance, 2 medium-sized tanks constitute a typical load. To take off such a heavy load on an unpowered glider, a towing operation with 3 Messerschmitt 110 twin-engined aircraft is undertaken. The cables to the aircraft are here being attached. Here is this interesting takeoff. The rocket units can be seen in operation under each wing. And finally, the glider becomes airborne. It is then towed back over the airfield and the assisted takeoff units jettisoned, to fall by parachute for collection and use again. The HS-293 radio-controlled rocket-propelled glider bomb was the first guided missile to be used operationally and was employed as an anti-shipping weapon from aircraft. Its use was made possible, among other things, by the development of the rocket motor. This diagram gives an idea of the method of attack employed. The aircraft generally approached the ship at an angle of 20 to 30 degrees to the ship's course, released the HS-293 at a range of 5 to 10 kilometers, flew on without deviation of course, and the bomb aimer guided the HS-293 by holding it in apparent coincidence with the target during the whole period of its drop. Here is the rocket motor employed on the HS-293. It is one of the simple Walther type, employing hydrogen peroxide and calcium permanganate, which are forced separately from their tanks into the combustion chamber by means of compressed gas. They react spontaneously when they meet. This is a cold unit and gives a thrust of 600 kilograms for approximately 10 seconds. The rocket motor is now taken to the HS-293, which is already installed on the aircraft, and clipped on beneath it by means of a simple 3-point fastening. This is actually an early version of the HS-293. Later versions dispensed with the retarding attachments on the wings, and also with the balance weight in the nose. These pictures demonstrate the remote control by radio of the elevator and ailerons, using the control stick to carry out these operations. Here is a bombing attack with the HS-293. These photographs are taken from an accompanying aircraft. As is seen, the rocket motor starts up just after the bomb has been dropped, increasing its speed and bringing it up again to about the level of the dropping aircraft. After 10 seconds operation, the rocket motor ceases to function. The bomb continues on its track under guiding by watching the flare in the tail. Here is another practice bombing attack which demonstrates the inline technique of control of the bomb. These photographs this time are taken from the bomb aimer's position in the parent aircraft, and it can be seen that an attempt is made to hold the bomb on a line running between the bomb aimer's eye and the white target building in the background. These pictures show the HS-294, a development of the HS-293, for attacking shipping below the waterline. This bomb employs 2 rocket motors of the same type as that used on the HS-293. The Germans were well aware of the possibilities of radio countermeasures being taken against radio-controlled bombs like the HS-293 and the HS-294, and developed a method of control utilizing a thin wire link between the aircraft and the missile during its fall to the target. These pictures show a wire-controlled HS-293 attached to a Heinkel 177 aircraft. Several miles of wire are of course necessary to maintain this contact, and a twin connection is needed to complete the circuit. As seen here, approximately half this length is contained in each of 2 bobbins, one attached to each wingtip of the HS-293, and the other half of the total length on 2 similar bobbins which remain attached to the aircraft. This type of wire control was not used operationally with the HS-293, but was considered a substantial advantage over radio-controlled, and was employed again later in the design of other guided missiles to be shown. The Messerschmitt Me-163 was the first rocket-propelled aircraft to be used operationally by any country. It was designed by the Germans as a short-range interceptor to operate on the lines shown in the diagram. An approaching bomber stream at a height of about 7 kilometers could be intercepted by the Messerschmitt Me-163, which was able to climb to this altitude and cover 22 kilometers over the ground by the time that the bomber stream traveled 20 kilometers. Here are the Messerschmitt Me-163A, the trainer version, and the 163B, the operational version. And here is a takeoff with the Messerschmitt Me-163A. This is chosen rather than the B to illustrate an attack, because the exhaust smoke is more easily visible. The B employed a more efficient motor of greater thrust, but its exhaust trail was scarcely visible. After a short horizontal flight, the Messerschmitt 163 now climbs to intercept. After reaching the necessary altitude, it flattens out, and in this case approaches a formation of flying fortresses. In the ensuing combat, the Germans show at least one fortress being shot down. After combat, the Me-163 has little or no fuel remaining and glides down to its airfield without power. During this period it is, of course, extremely vulnerable to enemy aircraft, and undoubtedly its short range and rapid fuel consumption is the reason why the 163 was not more successful when it was used operationally. Finally, the aircraft lands on a sprung skid and is eventually picked up by a specially constructed vehicle and towed away to be refueled. To give an idea of the procedure necessary in preparing a rocket aircraft using these fuels for a flight, various operations which were carried out with the Messerschmitt 163 are now shown. First, a water test was carried out, with the main fuel tanks filled with water to test for possible leaks. This test is shown here. When this has been successfully completed, fueling with the two fuels separately is carried out. First of all, the C-Stoff, that is, a solution of hydrazine hydrate in methyl alcohol, is filled from a specially constructed tank wagon. The ground crew employed wear some protective clothing, although this particular fuel is not especially dangerous. A water jet plays on the ground underneath the aircraft to wash away any drops which might come through the overflow pipe. When the tank is full, the funnel and the gloves used by the operator are thoroughly washed with water before they can be used for the second fuel, since it will be remembered that the mixing of the two fuels in the combustion chamber causes the fuel's reaction, which is the basis of the rocket motor's operation. When it is completed, the C-Stoff tank wagon is driven away, and the second fuel, the concentrated hydrogen peroxide, known as T-Stoff, is brought up. These pictures will show that even though this hydrogen peroxide is dangerous to handle from the point of view that it sets fire to material such as cloth and causes severe burns if it comes into contact with the skin, if a specially designed apparatus of this sort is used, it can be handled very successfully. As before, plenty of water is used to wash away remaining traces. When the aircraft is fueled, a static test may be carried out as shown here. Since the aircraft is not flying, and therefore not cooled to the same extent, water is sprayed on the tail when the jet is shut off. The static test is not necessarily carried out after every flight. These, then, are the operations necessary to prepare such a rocket-propelled aircraft as the Messerschmitt Me-163 for flight. Finally, here is a picture of the rocket motor employed in the 163B being prepared separately for a static test. It weighs only 167.5 kilograms and gives a controllable thrust of 300 kilograms to 1500 kilograms for a period up to 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Although the Walther type of rocket motor was always employed in the Me-163 and gave a very satisfactory performance, the firm of BMW had for some time been developing a similar motor to use concentrated nitric acid as fuel instead of concentrated hydrogen peroxide. Here the motor is shown in operation, and it will be noticed that very satisfactory combustion is achieved. The BMW rocket works was very well equipped, and these pictures give an idea of the various apparatus and facilities employed when carrying out these static tests to obtain remote registration of thrust, fuel consumption, rate, temperature at various parts of the motor, etc. Finally, here are some pictures of the BMW works, showing concentrated nitric acid being filled from a tank wagon into static tanks, employed on the test stands. They indicate that suitably resistant materials had been developed by BMW. Of all German rocket developments, the A4 long-range rocket, popularly the V2, represents the greatest technical achievement. The fuels used were liquid oxygen and alcohol. The rocket was launched vertically, and as soon as full thrust is applied, it rises from the ground and then gradually turns over by means of automatic instruments controlling the rudders until it is pointing at an angle of approximately 45 degrees towards its target, when the rocket motor is cut off. The rocket then continues under its own inertia to its maximum altitude of about 56 miles, then falls in a natural parabola towards its target. A maximum range of just over 200 miles was obtained. Some pictures are shown of two failures at launching. In the first case, the rocket became unstable during its upward flight and turned over, causing it to return to Earth. The rocket landed on a German aerodrome, and the damage done can clearly be seen. On this occasion, the rocket toppled before takeoff, causing the fuel tanks to explode. Finally, here is a launching during the Operation Backfire at Cuxhaven in November of 1945. The rockets in this case were fired into the North Sea. The X-4 was designed as an air-to-air weapon for fighters attacking large bomber formations. It is a remotely controlled rocket projectile, the control signals being transmitted by two spools of wire, each 1 kilometer in length, mounted on the wings of the missile. These spools may be clearly seen here. The missile is powered with a BMW nitric acid motor. As it proceeds towards its target, it rotates, slowly winding the two coils of wire into one. This picture shows an X-4 mounted on a Focke Wulf Fw-190, and pictures of it in flight are also shown. The method of filling the motor is shown here. First amine and secondly nitric acid are filled into their respective tanks. Here is a static test on the X-4 motor. The HS-298 was another rocket-propelled air-to-air missile with a range of 2.5 kilometers. It was to be launched from rails on the parent aircraft and guided to its target by radio control. Experiments were also underway to develop a direct wire control for this missile. These pictures show the method of mounting on an aircraft, and the VT fuse and generator can clearly be seen in front of the missile. The generator supplies power for the radio receiver and controls. Among the guided anti-aircraft missiles employing liquid fuel motors under development by the Germans was Enzian. This missile, which resembled a small aircraft, was launched from an inclined ramp on a modified 88mm gun mount and achieved a maximum speed of 850 feet per second. It was fitted with a nitric acid motor and employed 4 solid fuel assisted takeoff units which were jettisoned when the fuel was burned out, that is, after approximately 5 seconds. The missile was controlled by radio link and fitted with a proximity fuse designed to operate within 170 yards of the target. These pictures show the arrangement of the combustion chamber and the servo motors operating the control surfaces. The missile is placed on the ramp while it is in the horizontal position, and the ramp is then elevated by hand cranking to the required takeoff angle. These pictures show a water test being carried out to test the fuel tanks and system for leakages, but this would not be part of the standard launching procedure. Among other liquid fuel anti-aircraft rockets is the HS-117, known as Schmetterling. This is a smaller missile than the one previously seen, and employed a nitric acid motor developed by BMW. This missile also employed 2 solid fuel assisted takeoff units, which were also jettisoned when the missile was airborne. It will be seen that the operation of conveying the weapon to the firing point, raising it and placing on the ramp required only 2 men. This rocket was designed to be able to destroy a flying fortress when it exploded within 25 feet. Its ceiling was 25,000 feet, and its speed governed to 537 miles per hour, irrespective of altitude. Here are some pictures of test firings of the Schmetterling. The reason for the peculiar rotating motion of the missile is not known, but it was deliberate and was later dispensed with. A static test of the HS-117 nitric acid motor. Fueling the nitric acid motor was a relatively simple task, the fuel being brought to the fueling point in this tank wagon and the fuel being passed into the motor through appropriate fueling points. Wasserfall is a supersonic guided anti-aircraft missile intended for the attack of large bomber formations. This rocket is actually a scaled-down version of the A4 with wings added, although there are slight differences in the two rockets. Wasserfall employs a nitric acid motor, and the fuels are fed into the combustion chamber by means of compressed gas instead of pumps. The rocket was required to be able to destroy an aircraft flying at a speed of 560 miles per hour at 65,000 feet. Its maximum speed was estimated at approximately 2,500 feet per second. This is the control apparatus, part of the Rhineland system, being tested prior to launching of Wasserfall. Although for rocket motors requiring ease of control and long burning, liquid fuels are always to be preferred, there are still some applications for solid fuels. An example of this is the Rheintochtor guided anti-aircraft projectile. This missile was developed by Rheinmetall-Borsig, but was still under development when the war ended. These pictures show the first firing trials of the Rheintochtor. The first test was to check the stability of the missile once it was airborne, and it will be seen that a considerable degree of stability had been achieved. In this particular test, the boost unit at the rear does not separate. Another trial to test the rotary controls. Again, the boost unit does not separate, but it will be noted that the missile is very slowly rotating whilst in flight. Another trial, this time to test the stability after separation, and in this test the boost unit will be seen to separate from the main projectile. Another application of solid fuel motors is the rocket-assisted armor-piercing bomb used in 1941 against shipping in the Mediterranean area. These bombs were used exclusively by dive bombers, where the low release altitude does not always enable the bomb to attain sufficient velocity for piercing armor. When dive bombers went out of action, so did these bombs. This is a later development. A spherical bomb is released from a fighter and increased in speed by a rocket. When the bomb strikes the surface of the sea, the bomb separates from the rocket and bounces along on the surface of the sea for a considerable distance. The idea was that when the bomb struck a ship, it would sink, and a hydrostatic fuse would cause the bomb to function at a predetermined depth. Another drop, again illustrating the effect of the rocket in substantially increasing the forward speed of the bomb. Now we have a test where two bombs are dropped simultaneously. In this case they are not rocket-assisted. Here the bomb will be clearly seen toward the end of its run. Another test with again two unassisted bombs being dropped. At the end of their run, the bombs will sink, and the hydrostatic fuses will operate, showing the extensive effects of this particular bomb. Here is what must be the last word in solid fuel rockets. A 4-stage, ground-to-ground, long-range weapon, the Rheinbote. Also still under development by Rheinmetall-Borsig at the end of the war. A range of 90 miles was calculated for this weapon, but it carried a warhead of only about 56 pounds. The firing trials show that some success has been achieved from a technical point of view. The first stage, having burned out, is seen to fall off, followed later by the second stage. Finally, here is what may well prove to be a more peaceful application of the rocket as a power unit. In this case, 2 solid fuel rockets are used to enable a glider to take off in mountainous country without having to use any complicated take-off apparatus. The rocket motors consist of a single solid stick of fuel and give a thrust of 400 kilograms for approximately 6 seconds, and this gives the glider sufficient impulse to carry it for about 25 miles. The takeoff is seen to be quite easily accomplished, and the glider rises from the ground quite swiftly. Here is a static test showing the operation of charging and initiation of the motor. This, therefore, brings us right up to the present day. But what of the future? Werner von Braun, the chief engineer of the A4 long-range rocket, obtained his ideas and enthusiasm for this project from Nebel and Obert, who already in 1932 clearly visualized and predicted this development as a stage in the ultimate construction of a spaceship. The A4, which was first put into use by the Germans in 1944, represents the greatest advance in rocket technique. Here is the rocket, weighing over 12 tons, of which 8 tons are fuel, starting out on its journey, which will take it to an altitude of 300,000 feet, ending with the missile crashing on its target at a speed in excess of 3,000 miles per hour. Causing widespread destruction, as is well known. The prediction of the long-range rocket made by Hermann Obert long before the war has since proved right. He also forecast the next stage of development, the spaceship. In this version of his idea, which dates back to 1932, it will be seen that he already appreciated the necessity of vertical launching, as in fact was later employed with the A4. This is a multi-stage rocket. The initial stage, to which the stabilizers are attached, is jettisoned when the rocket passes out of the Earth's atmosphere. He suggested that in view of the intense heat generated at takeoff, water cooling for this period would be necessary. One can imagine the space traveller, looking back at the town he has just left, seeing something like this, the Earth rapidly receding beneath him. As the spaceship reaches the outer extremities of the atmosphere, the first stage is jettisoned. The rocket continues, on into the vast region of space, finally leaving the Earth behind as a rapidly receding planet. And on this note of fantasy, we bring our story of the rocket to a close.